So last week, I forced myself finally to watch a 4-part documentary called We Need to Talk About Cosby. It wasn't easy. I'll tell you why in a second, but the doc was released 2022 on Showtime. It's made by comedian W. Kamau Bell, and it tells the story of Cosby's career and his alleged serial rapes of women, and gets reactions from various people, most of them kind of woke leftist black Americans. Not all of them, but most of them woke leftist black Americans. And I call my reaction one man's Cosby. And to begin with, let me say Cosby was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault against one woman. A lot of the women's, statute of limitations had run out, but he was accused by around 60 women who said he drugged and raped them. He was released from prison after 3 years of a 3 to 10 year sentence on what you might call a legitimate technicality. The court found that statements Cosby had made, self-incriminating statements he'd made under the promise of immunity, were unfairly used to convict him because he'd been given immunity. And that is unfair, but obviously it doesn't mean that he didn't commit the crimes, right? It's just an unfair, it's a true technicality. It's something they should have done, but it still doesn't mean he didn't commit the crimes. Now, I just want to state my belief at the outset that I believe he committed these crimes. They were horrible crimes. The descriptions in the documentary made my eyes bleed. And if I'm right and he did these things, then what it means is one of the most important and most brilliant and consequential American entertainers of the last certainly of the 20th century, was an absolute villain. And that's what I want to talk about. And the reason it was hard for me to watch is because this guy, between the ages of 10 and 13, I worshiped this guy. This guy was my hero, and I kind of think he appealed to me. My father was a comedian, and I think he was who I couldn't use as a role model, and I think he was a comedian who I could use as a role model and somebody who didn't hate me and oppress me. My wall was plastered with Cosby pictures the way another kid might have had sports heroes up there. I actually wanted to be a comedian for a brief period of time just because of wanting to imitate him. When the TV show I Spy came out, it was a spy show where he was the first lead in a weekly drama. I watched every single episode. There was this thing with his co-star Robert Culp where they would ad-lib this kind of jazzy, cool dialogue, and I just ate it up. I just loved it. Culp wrote one of the episodes. He wrote all of the best episodes, I think, but one called Home to Judgment, I thought was the greatest television show. And I remember, I'm a little kid. My father was in show business, and he helped me meet Cosby when he was filming the opening to his first special. I shook his hand and I was awestruck, obviously, and he got me in through his contacts to see them filming a scene of I Spy, which was then obviously my favorite show. I got to see Cosby perform at least twice. It may have been 3 times. I just worshiped the guy. When I got to be 13, around that age, I discovered Girls and I moved on, and Cosby's whole second career as America's dad, The Cosby Show, meant absolutely nothing to me. I was happy my childhood hero was doing well, but I didn't really, care what he was doing. I wasn't interested in that part of his career. But still, when the rape allegations came, I felt it like, he was my hero as a kid, and it hurt, Now, obviously, all of this meant something different to black people than it did to a relatively privileged white guy, right? To black people, he brought their lives into the mainstream, and they felt proud of him, and that's a totally natural thing. I felt proud that the great Dodgers pitcher, Sandy Koufax, was a Jew. It made me feel that Jews were being welcomed into America, were part of the American scene. I'm sure Cosby made a lot of black people feel the same way. But I can honestly say, in my worship of this guy, his blackness meant almost nothing to me. And it's not like, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. I could see perfectly well that he was black. I thought it was cool that his comedy came from a grittier scene than my life, which was a suburban life. And I thought it was cool that blacks were moving up in the world. It made me proud of Cosby. It made me proud of America. I still think it's a wonderful thing about America, but it was just one more group of people to me. It was like Irish, Italians, Jews, now blacks. And so I understand there are differences, but still, that's the way I looked at it. And where the commentators, like I said, they're mostly leftist people, and the commentators in this documentary talk about the fact that Cosby's comedy at first was relatively unracial, and they talk about making whites comfortable and ignoring the race. But to me, I see it still. I'm not sure I would have thought about it then, but I see it now as a power move, right? If there is such a thing as white privilege, What white privilege is the privilege of any majority of not having to think about themselves. Blacks talk about being black, Jews talk about being Jewish, gays talk about being gays because they're in a minority, and being in a minority is an experience, right? Where being in the majority is not. It's just being normal, right? So that's the way whites feel, not because they're white, but because they're the majority in that country, in this country. And so they feel like it's just normal. You know, what are you complaining about? And I think what Cosby was saying with his comedy is, I'm the same way. I'm normal. I'm just an American. I'm just a guy. Yes, I'm black. Yes, it's part of who I am, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about. And I think it was a power move. It was claiming that privilege for himself. Who was it? Jack Benny, famous Jewish comedian back in the old days of vaudeville and all this. He was a Jewish comedian who used classic Jewish cliches, like he was cheap. He played the violin. He had classic kind of Jewish cliches, but he never mentioned that they were Jewish. He was just Jack Benny. And I think Cosby did the same kind of thing. So when these sex allegations started to come out, my first reaction was kind of it wasn't to defend him in any way, but it was to sort of feel sorry for him because he knocked women out a lot of times and then raped them. And I thought, what kind of compulsion is that? I thought I'd had every sexual fantasy there was. I didn't think I'd left any out. But yeah, that doesn't even seem interesting to me. It just seemed like a sort of weird addiction that you had to do this to women. But that's still putting your kind of feelings into Cosby's camp because he was my hero and I didn't want to actually think about it. But then when I listened to some of these descriptions, here's one of them. Let me play one description of what he did to a woman that really just made me very upset.
He kept ignoring me, and then he started getting this irritated look on his face because I was distracting him. And then he finally started getting so annoyed, and I could just see his face changing, this anger coming over, and he stood up and he came walking towards me, and I got panicky and I stood up and then lost my balance and grabbed onto him. And the next thing I knew, I was on my knees in front of the sofa, and well, he orally raped me. And then he stood me up and bent me over and did me doggy style and split. And as he's going out the door, I said, how are we getting out of here? And how are we getting home? And he just pointed, he didn't even look at me. He pointed to the desk and he said, call a cab. And he slammed the door.
All right, so that's evil, right? That's evil. Here's a woman in late middle age, if not in an older age, and this happened to her when she was young and very attractive woman, and she's still choking up over it. Of course she is. She's been brutally abused by this guy who had all the power in the world, all the fame, all the money. He could have had women coming and going, but this is the way he treated women, and so this is a terrible thing. And the other thing about him is, I was confirmed in my feelings, because there were some comedians in this, that the guy was a genius. He was a genius comedian. There's very touching scenes of them watching his famous concert film, Bill Cosby himself, and they're watching it on iPads for the documentary, and they're just going, God, this guy's so good. He was so good. He was so creative. Seinfeld says he's basically the definition, the linchpin of modern comedy, and he just was. And it was all clean like Seinfeld, and that's the thing that's that is so disturbing about it, that this great genius of a comedian was doing these things to people. And he would set himself up as a mentor and promise these people things. And, one thing that I came away with is that everybody had to have known. Everybody had to know he was doing something. They had to know he was doing something. It's just like Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein, they knew. And I hate feminism. I think it's bad for people. I think it makes them unhappy. But I always tell leftists, just because you've identified a problem doesn't mean your solution is the right one. Well, same thing goes in reverse, that just because you don't like the left solution doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. And the way that women are treated, the hatred, the anger that Cosby was expressing, and that was legitimate to express, that Harvey Weinstein expresses, that Jeffrey Epstein expresses, the fact that not one of the men who took advantage of Epstein's pimp power has been arrested or accused. I mean, just some people have been accused, but no one's been brought before the law. It just tells you something about the society that's off, that's wrong. And I don't think it's just our society. I think it's been true maybe throughout history. And I think it's something we should really think about. And I think politics and feminism keep us from thinking about it in a real way. It's something that actually does need philosophical reflection. I'm going to reflect on it, not today, but I'm going to come back to it because I think it's really a disturbing fact. But the thing is here, Cosby was not caught because he raped women. The fact of these women's accusations were in the wind. They were out there, and none of them touched him, and nobody picked them up until Cosby left the regime, the clerisy regime, and started to talk about the responsibility of black people for taking care of themselves, started to rave about how, they had to take responsibility for themselves. They had to learn to speak English. They had to stop calling their children weird names like Lahasha and Lahana. They had to stop, started getting married and give these kids homes and all this. And the reaction to that on this show was exemplified, the reaction of the left and the media in general. Here's this clip.
For the first time in his career, Bill Cosby divided the black community.
It's on us.
To be fair, some black folks loved it. But many of us hated it and felt betrayed. And it hurt even more when he wrote a book about it and took this new act on the road.
What's the problem here? Why are we worried about dirty laundry? I'm talking about dead, young males. Believe a child when she says somebody's fondling her.
Bill Cosby turned this one speech into the next phase of his career. And a lot of the people who loved what he was saying did not have the best interests of black people at heart.
What are you going to do about the war in the inner city?
Well, about the war in the inner city, number one, is to get more moms and dads. That's number one. And thank heavens Bill Cosby said it like it was. That's where the root of crime starts.
The idea that Mitt Romney doesn't have the welfare of black people at heart, it's just garbage. It's just garbage, Of course he does. Of course he does. He just doesn't have leftism in his heart because leftism doesn't work. And the thing about black people taking responsibility for themselves is it's not fair. Things have been done to them that can't be undone, and it's not fair that they can only rise by taking responsibility for themselves. It just happens to be a fact. It's a frustrating, not fair. It's a fact. That's the only way up. The only way up is to leave the past behind because the past ain't going to change one little bit. Not one day of the past is going to change, and not one ramification of the past can be corrected. You just have to change yourself. You just have to. So Cosby was right about this, but it drove them crazy. And this is what happened. I'm taking this from Wikipedia. I knew it already, but I'm reading it off theirs. Cosby social commentary led to the unsealing of documents in a previous civil suit by a woman who had accused Cosby of sexual assault, which in turn sparked renewed interest in older allegations. The judge ruled that releasing the sealed documents was justified by the, quote, stark contrast between Bill Cosby, the public moralist, and Bill Cosby, the subject of serious allegations concerning improper and perhaps criminal conduct. That's why he unsealed it. Cosby was not caught for what he did to women. He was caught for what he said about black people, and what he said about black people was unfair, but true. Then after all these things were unsealed, a comedian named Hannibal Buress mentioned the allegations in a routine, and that became a big thing. So what do I take away from this hero of mine, who now, it really does seem to me, I'll say it's alleged because he got off on that technicality, but it seems to me that he raped more than 60 women and treated them like garbage. Well, first, I think we have to talk about, at some point, the way people actually feel about women and treat women in this country, from the transgender movement, who is basically eliminating women, to the people who didn't say anything about Harvey Weinstein, which is all of Hollywood, to the people who don't say anything about Jeffrey Epstein, which is the entire establishment, who are not going after these guys. That's something we have to talk about. But the other message about Cosby is this. It's not that there are no heroes. It's that heroes aren't what we think they are. Heroes are people who rise above themselves. Cosby was a genius comedian, and I'm not sure that makes him a hero, but it makes him a genius comedian. But that genius is the spirit, and the spirit goes where it will. Talent is blind. Spirit is blind. It lands on people you just can't believe, who suddenly say things that are meaningful, who suddenly do things that are beautiful. And when T.S. Eliot, the poet, said, the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. The more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material. The thing is, the man who did these things is not the spirit who spoke through him. And when we look at talent, and when we see performers who do beautiful things, artists who do beautiful things, even politicians who do great things, all the kinds of heroes that we have, sports people who do great things, we have to remember that what we are seeing is the spirit in action. We have to worship that spirit, but we have to let the guy go, because if you follow human beings, if you put your trust in human beings, you're going to follow them right into the darkness. Cosby's darkness was darker than most. I mean, really dark. But he was a genius comedian and a guy who did a lot of great good through his comedy and through his performances. It's just a very hard thing to keep in your mind. It's a very hard thing for me to keep in my mind. This guy who meant so much to me in my youth turned out to be, I believe, a very, very great villain. It just shows you that when the Spirit moves in us, what we're seeing is the Spirit, not the flesh. For more excellence, like and subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast.